My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Welcome to the Jali podcast. I'm your host, Melyssa Barrett. This podcast is for those who are interested in the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Each week, I'll be interviewing a guest who has something special to share or is actively part of building solutions in the space. Let's get started. Welcome to the Jali podcast. Today, we're excited to have Jennifer Schmitz. She is the CEO of Lattice Industries. She is a leader in transforming infrastructure through innovative data solutions. Inspired by the visionary work of Norman Anderson in his book Vision, Jenna is at the forefront of creating smarter, more resilient cities. She is literally revolutionizing how we use data to empower communities and shape the future of living. Let's dive into the conversation on the power of vision and strategic infrastructure. So I am just so excited to have you on the Jali podcast because I personally have worked with you for, I think it's decades now. But you are one of those women that you're doing things that are totally different, unexpected, kind of bringing things together and working in areas where you typically don't see a lot of women. So I'm excited to kind of tell everybody about some of the things that you're doing, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your vision as well. So first of all, thank you for being here. But first, I want to make sure to just kind of set some context, because I think you come, Jennifer, with so much background. You have kind of this hodgepodge of different things that you've done in the world, in life. And I just kind of want people to understand where you've come from, so that they can appreciate where you are and what you're doing.
Okay. Well, I thank you for having me, because it's a pleasure to see you in action. So where do we begin? How does a person get to do crazy things in the world to try to make it a better place, right? So I've recently turned 52 years of age, and I had to do a little kind of saying, how the heck did I get here? And what we really focus on, and what I focus on, and everything that I've built, is really going someplace and making it a better place by the time I leave. And I had as you brought up, a very odd background. I was one of those average kids who had good parents. My mother worked in the school district outside of Chicago. My father was an engineer. And they put us, all us kids through, 5 kids through Catholic schools. And of course, after that, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Spend time, do I want to go to this school, that school, which is a privilege, right? Both my parents being highly educated. So we didn't have a choice. I had to go to college, and I had to incur my own debt. That was part of our, situation. So it wasn't any free rides. We started working, everyone in my family. It was an interesting growing up. We never got an allowance. It was always, you had to earn money doing something, almost on a 1-to-1, right? If I wanted a little television, that I had to go cut the lawn for 3 weeks in a row, right? So it was this thing we were brought up with, that you had to earn it. My parents have a background. They were middle-class people. They are all hardworking throughout their entire lives. And we just had to earn everything we did. So we never assumed anything was free. Even though I lived in a very nice neighborhood, we were the kids that had to go work at the pizza place if you wanted to actually make some money. So from there, I ended up going to college. I had no idea what I was doing. I wanted the nicest, longest place that I could go on vacation. So I decided to take an international studies / archaeology degree. And it's ironic because I did nothing with that as I grew older, except it taught me to know about people. And so that's where when you understand a culture and you understand there's a lot of cultures and there's a lot of things that people do, but you also understand that people are more similar, they are dissimilar. And so it helped me in a career that I would go forward in, nothing that I knew before, nothing that I ever had an intention in, but basically come up to some of the biggest things that women have done in their lifetime. So I started my career after college, one of the few women down on the exchange floor in Chicago. So I actually worked at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange as one of my first jobs out of college. And within 2 years, I had my own seat. And I was one of the rare, not only being a woman, but I was not related to anyone. I didn't even have this big finance background, but what it took was hard work, wanting the want to understand what was going on. And I love financial markets, because what I did learn is that what makes up a financial market is people. And every time something goes wrong, there's someone who wants to take that opportunity and take it as far as it can go. So it could either be you or it can be them. And that idealism would be what would shape the rest of my life. My mother, my grandmother, very strong women, but I'll tell you right now, my mom taught me the best lesson in life. If you don't ask for it, you will never get it. So I saw an opportunity. I asked, hi, can I be a clerk down on the exchange? Then I asked, hey, can I become a trader? Hi, can I become a filling broker? And I moved my way up in a very short period of time, which was unheard of for, women in general. And they're talking in the early 90s. And so I would sit at the age of 22, going through Brazilian crashes. By the age of 28, around 28, I got to do the math, but basically I was actually on the trading floor when 9/11 occurred, and I was very young. And I was a specialist in a company called Raytheon. And Raytheon actually creates the Patriot missiles. And we were one of the few pits that the FBI after 9/11 came to. And they tracked the financial links to Al Qaeda through one of the funds that had actually traded through our pit. And it scared the heck out of me. The first time I ever saw an FBI agent with the FBI sign on the back and said, what's going on? And so what was interesting is actually learning that technology and risk can go hand in hand. And then also they can be exploited, but also you can find the bad guys through technology. So that would, again, shape my career. So for the next couple of years, I moved to California. I spent some time working in the financial industry, Charles Schwab's based out of San Francisco. And then I wanted to expand my knowledge base and really kind of focus on what is a global market for risk, finance, and everything. So I went down to Monterey Institute of International Studies, where I actually saw a global view of what the world actually is interested in. It was the first time I saw kids that actually had communicated via this video concept across the world to their families that they had missed. And I said, this is awesome. This wasn't there when I had my undergrad, right? And I said, well, what happens if they get all this stuff from technology? And I started to understand that the world was going technical, whether we liked it or not. I mean, I met people from Kosovo that had been in a war torn, and they're telling me about what I didn't know in America about video conferencing. And so you see that there's this leapfrog effect in technology. And I was always amazed to see, well, what else can we do if we bring in some of these best practices from all over the world? So it was interesting. From there, I would go on and I would end up moving out from my MBA. I got a nice job up in Marin County, worked for a bunch of financial guys again, and I was bored out of my gourd. It was a lot I'd seen in a very short period of time. I mean, by this time, I'm barely in my mid-30s. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I can, work in finance for the rest of my life, have lots of money, and I will get bored in 5 seconds flat. So boredom, I think, is a big motivator too. So if you're not keeping someone's interest, it's not going to happen. And I am a living proof that I have to be interested. And if you're interested in something, you're going to go further. So I took the best practices from that and ended up getting a job. My best friend at the time was from Michigan. Very interesting friends who say, hey, you are much better than this. And as I was sitting there making 6 figures, I go, what's better than 6 figures? She goes, something you actually enjoy. So I ended up taking a job with her at Visa Inc., which was interesting in itself. It was the first time that someone from a trading pit had to sit in a very large corporation that was global, although I was very used to global activity because we had done commodities and trades around the world. And so I took my skill set, saw what was actually happening. And what was interesting, it was the same thing that occurred where you see this technology transfer and actually accelerating operations and efficiency through technology, which is what I had experienced on the trading floor when it went from hand signals to computers, and helping kind of close that gap for a generation that wasn't used to computers, but they had to move forward. So we saw this within credit cards and the risk and the financial risk, but also the reward to people who do need credit and how things should be done the proper way. And as you see, it was a big system that I had to learn about, but it was actually very reflective of what I saw in the commodity exchanges, where it actually was a bunch of members, a bunch of people worried about risk, a bunch of people making rules that everybody benefited from, and this sense of honor that we all are here for a purpose. And this process and system is helping us accomplish those goals. And it was interesting because I kind of took that with us as we then, Melyssa, where we met, with risk. And it was one of those things where, you started to realize there's people out there that want to go forward and there's people out there that want to go backwards. And they'll take what you have if you're not looking. There are what they call scavengers and there are hunters. I like to consider myself a hunter. And so, that kind of got to where we were in around 2018. I exited Visa. I thought, okay, early retirement, here we go. And then again, I was bored. I was designing houses. I was doing all these things that I thought I wanted to do. And yet I still felt bored. So I said, okay, I'll help you out. I'll look at this connectivity, this digital infrastructure everybody's been talking about, but we've been doing networks around the world with payments. So I went out and I dealt with the city I was living in at the time, which was Wilmington, Delaware, which was interesting. I was there with President Biden got elected. I was there when President Trump got elected. So I've seen a very, very amazing things in the last couple of years about how people just react to things in general and how they feel, if they feel secure. And it reminded me working in those systems where let's see what cities are doing on digital infrastructure, and make sure that people do feel secure. Unfortunately, what I found was there was a void. There was none. Nobody's in control. At least Visa would control the banks, it would control the payments and everything else. But it was one of those things where you're like, well, what do you mean my city isn't secure? I assumed my city was secure. I assumed my roads were secure. I assume my government is taking care of, their business. And that's when reality struck that said, wait a minute, I've been helping the for-profit financial services for all this time, making them more efficient, reducing their risk, reducing their fraud. All the while, we're all at risk. And if we just took some of those good things that we learned from helping those folks out in the financial industry and we applied it to our systems out for people, we could get everybody working together, get them a little bit more organized and get a lot more in that. And so that's what brings us to today. And for the last 5 years now, we've been working on trying to make this world a better place by making sure people understand they have digital equity and not to give it away.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's so interesting about this space, because there is really a bit of a void. When we think about kind of the broader institutional perspective, we have people that are focused on infrastructure. And in many cases, many of the rooms that you have brought me into, it's like literally a lot of the same people that created the current infrastructure and institutions are like still in the room.
Yeah. They're all those nice men are still in the room 50 years later.
I mean, it's kind of amazing in a way, but with all of the challenges that current infrastructure has in terms of marginalization and not funding particular parts of a city or state or all of those things, it's like, let's not make the same mistakes we've made before. And so what I love about kind of your vision of it, first of all, your vision is not easy. And to me, things that are worth it aren't quick and easy. They take time. They're complicated. Infrastructure is one of those things. And so one of the things that I would love for you to talk a little bit about is you literally are trying to commodify data. And so kind of explain what that means, because I think your background coming from the Chicago exchange really informs your vision in some way.
Everybody's heard the term data's the new oil. Well, if you ever say that to a commodity trader, the commodity trader says, well, is there a trade in there? maybe it really is the next oil. How can we make it look like oil? And everything that drives you because you're like, maybe I can buy it low and sell it high, right? So having the background that I had, and we delved very deep into data science, in some of these large financial institutions. And every day there's all kinds of information, but we went through cleansing data when you work in a payment system, because obviously nobody wants your private information. The banks will let it, the merchants will kill it. They don't want to give their information, but yeah, we all use payments every single moment of every single day. And what that was amazing is I started to think about data's data. It doesn't matter if the data is payment data. It doesn't matter if the data is health data. Data, like oil, can do good, or it can catch your entire town on fire. So the key there is actually the management and the governance of what is an underlying factor for so many industries, which, by the way, is the definition of a commodity. And you can't give me one industry today that doesn't run on data. I cannot think of one. Even the most organic farms today have information systems that are requiring cybersecurity. Okay, so the idea is, instead of just talking about it, let's formally create a system where data is managed with community, with folks that are informed on how this works, and do it together, similar to every other commodity that's done on exchanges in the world. Because guess what? That actually helps set the pace for the manufacturing, for the supply chains, for everything we're going to do in our future, because everything will be connected. And the key there is, if we can harvest that what I call digital equity, then everybody understands that, it is the new oil. And if managed properly, we all might be just better off. And there's ways to do that. And that's where we take the best practices from the worlds that have been basically trading data for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Well, and ideally, I spent years of my life negotiating data contracts. So if there's a more efficient way to move data without having to spend 3 years trying to figure out what data is being exchanged, it's definitely a win. I would put it. And I think corporation would love it.
Think about just a basic, everybody has a credit report. Okay. What goes into everyone's basic credit report are so many data points, but every year Experian has to cut deals and contracts with everybody that they get that same information from every single year. And just the actual administration of that, the contract costs, the lawyers, if we can take that, what I call that part out of the equation, we can lower the cost, speed up the efficiency that's driven by data, and get us to a place where we have a more secure world, a more efficient world, and we optimize where the slack is, right? And that's what we need to actually focus on, instead of screwing around with all this, these what I call shiny elements at the end. I want autonomous cars. I want a smart city. Unless you can manage data appropriately for everybody's interest, we're going to be always behind foreign countries that are doing this, and sovereign nations that don't need a democratic process. So the way that it works in our world, in our democracy in America, is that we are driven by free markets. And those free markets are managed by institutions that get together and agree on the rules of playing in a marketplace. And that's what shapes those commodities and the world that actually relies on those commodities. And I think what we're doing, and this is the beauty of where we are, we can connect people and actually do this at the same time. And there's methods to keep that.
Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back.
And I think what's so exciting to me is coming from kind of the corporate for-profit world, and then understanding that infrastructure, if you have a smart city, or if they're putting sensors in the street or whatever, that is a form of data. The governments, whether it be city, county, whatever, a lot of governments don't understand what is required when it comes to exchanging data. And so now you have a benefit to the community potentially, but you also have this management of data and all the risks that go along with that, right? And so what I love about this model is not only do you bring in the opportunity for technology to be innovative, but then you actually have a public benefit, a private benefit, because I know corporations are going to understand the value of all of this. And then the really the citizens are represented in that contractual exchange, which really doesn't happen much today. I mean, I think a lot of cities, specifically city councils, struggle with kind of pushing technology forward, but actually engaging the community and helping them understand what they're doing, right?
Yeah, and we've been across cities all across America, from West Virginia to Florida, from Reno to small cities that you can't even imagine. You look at them and they all have the same problem. They need to be in a cyber world and they don't have the expertise. Then they're supposed to control the spend, which they don't even know what they're buying because they know they need to buy something so they get taken advantage of. And it's sad because I wish I was telling a story that was different from Florida to Washington State, but it's not, or Maine to San Diego. This is the same context again and again. And what's interesting, if you think about it, we outsource things that are utilities. So we can create a data utility where we the people can actually participate in the revenue generation of it, like a digital tollway. And then, as you charge that toll to use that, you charge, the industries and the folks that need the data. And you can start to pay for some of that infrastructure. But what's nice is it's giving something back to the community. Let them own the utility. Let them have the benefit of the internal operations where they protect the region. And then also allow them to have a bit of the equity that's actually coming out of that digital, environment. And that way, everybody's involved. Everybody cares. And they don't feel like it's just Google or Apple who's making all the money on technology. They feel like they're getting something in return, which also helps the biggest companies because, this is a governance issue. If you can't come to a compromise, they're going to start forcing things down, and that's never good for business.
Well, and that's what's so interesting to me because as now we talk about, you're leading Lattice Industries. I'm leading the Data Institute, where we're focusing on the governance policy and digital equity, kind of driving that innovation, while your company is truly creating the technology for the commodification of this data, which really, I think both of us probably wake up every day trying to make sure that we are thinking about digital inclusivity and how we can engage the community, local communities, to make sure that it's self-sustaining, and that the government itself is actually engaged. But it's really interesting to me because this becomes another reason why it's so important to vote up and down your ticket. Oh
yeah.
And I'm not even getting into parties or candidates. I'm just saying your policy is created at your city council.
That's what people need. And I am the average American, as I say. I didn't really know even who was on my city council when I lived in multiple places, right? What I started to understand doing this job, where we're going to these cities, trying to help them structure their infrastructure model for the next 10 years or 20 years, is that your city council folks, who are just elected folks of the community, may not have that expertise. And it's relying on them first before it gets to your regional or your county or your transportation agency that might be more sophisticated. These are real people. So if, they can't see the benefit, it doesn't move. And then that kind of keeps everybody behind. So what we're trying to do is go out and educate those people, Melyssa, because for the last 20 years, and it's made a lot of people rich, but we've given our digital equity away. I'm not even going to touch social media, but where I'm going. Okay. It's ridiculous. And I think we all know that. I get frustrated when I get and this is one of my biggest issues with Lattice, and I know with the Data Institute, is the exploitation in technology, the exploitation of data. that is not going to get anybody anywhere. Okay. We call that arbitrage. I'm gonna get what you're giving away in the middle, right? In the financial world. And the key is an efficient marketplace. And the key, and this is literally the definition of efficient markets, is when there isn't an arbitrage. Okay. That somebody can't take that stuff free in the middle anymore. So if you're going to actually have digital equity, it should be the benefit needs to go back to the community so they can make more data, which provides more digital equity, which drives the innovation and, pushes our technological industry and our industries across the board further ahead. Use AI the right way. That's what I'm asking of the world. And I think if we understand the value of that, we can propel our society so fast into the future. We just got to be able to buckle up and just enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. So I want to flip a little bit of a switch here, because I really do want to make sure that we give some honor to, I know a couple of folks that have been so instrumental in mentoring you. And certainly I'm so thankful that, he even left us a book to read. But Norm Anderson, I just want to kind of give him a shout out and maybe you can talk a little bit about Norm and CGLA and all of the things that they have done and are doing in the world, because I think his leadership and vision is just so interesting in terms of how you've been able to kind of take his legacy, if you will, in some way, and kind of put it in this context.
Absolutely. Norman Anderson, who was the CEO of CGLA Infrastructure, founder of the Strategic Infrastructure Performance Institute, which is out of Washington, D.C., had been in infrastructure literally since the 70s. I joke, since I was born. He had an interesting background that I loved. He was actually in the Peace Corps, served, I believe he met his wife, I think, but had a deep sense of other countries and other cultures. But his strength was infrastructure, and he helped develop policies for America, for, really looking at these folks and on these projects around the world, and how can we leverage this infrastructure, push it forward, and advance America. He was probably the most influential person I know that worked on the infrastructure bill that actually got passed, and actually helped to bring this concept of public-private partnerships, and in the case with the people, that'd be the P4, to infrastructure, because he saw the writing on the wall. There's not enough federal money to replace every single road, every single bridge, every single community structure across America. We're going to need private investment, but also there's a purpose. Private investment should come from industry because it's in industry's best interest. And if they have the finances and we have the ability to create the legislation to make this pass, then those two beautiful things together are actually what grows the next 50 years of America's productivity. And he told me, he goes, sometimes I remember, because that infrastructure bill had to go across the aisle, and infrastructure is not much for the Democrats in this field are not very strong. But it was one of those things where we started, we're all Americans, and these are our roads. Nobody's paying attention to the most fundamental part of what builds our economy, and that is actually the way to get it to and from the store and the manufacturing, from producer to port, the things that nobody's been thinking of, and unfortunately, it puts us behind. And he was so adamant. He said, we have to move. And it was so inspirational, because we had just different viewpoints on things, But the one thing we both agreed is that infrastructure, a lot of the infrastructure in our country was formed, like the roadway system, the tollway system, was actually from the Defense Act bill. And these are not just roads. These are our prosperity. These are our security, these infrastructure projects. And we all need to get involved, and we all need to benefit. And it was putting that together. So he created what we call the New American Model. And it was just an image of that, where you could actually use the financing, use the structure of government, create special purpose vehicles that focus on what this was, because there was benefits. You can't run everything through their government, because sometimes expertise, like data scientists, their salaries are so much higher than what the government salary cap is. You're not going to even buy talent. You can't. So it's an inefficient before you even start. And that was what he really drove. And then he said, if we work together, what every project should do is create a revenue model out of it. And that's where data came in. So I never knew about infrastructure and construction and all these things going on around the globe and carbon credits and things that I've heard about, but it's amazing what goes into the infrastructure world. It's huge. It's the biggest money in the world I've ever seen, but it touches everything from energy to transportation. And the sad part is he says, if we do not move now, and I believe this because I've, been talking to folks who do infrastructure around the world because of Norman, America will be left in the past. And so it was his thing. And he ended up, he taught us a lot. And right after that infrastructure bill passed, unfortunately, Norman also passed. And it was one of those things where it was like, wow, literally, it was his life's work.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I mean, every time I think of him, I unfortunately never got to meet him in person. But I am the one who sees the impact that he has created on a daily basis. Like I said, I'm grateful. He has a book out that he published just before he passed, called Vision. And so look it up, Vision by Norman Anderson. He is just he was a brilliant man.
Great, right? He could sum it up in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
He told me, he goes, the other side of the aisle just needs a big hug. We got to get this infrastructure done. And it was writing that book that he did. It was really a roadmap for our country and infrastructure. It was one of those things that we have to do it this way. And it was a legacy to him. And anybody who gets the book or knows infrastructure, he used to write for Forbes magazine on infrastructure. He is an expert. And I'm just glad to have had the time with him that I did.
Well, and I think what I appreciate about him so much is not only did he write about infrastructure, but he wrote about the intention that we need to have around inclusivity and equity. I mean, he literally wrote, like, we can't just think we're going to put some stuff in. We need to be intentional about how it impacts our communities and the equity that needs to be shared in terms of whether you call it an opportunity zone or a marginalized community, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to be included. And that requires full intention when you're talking about modifying our entire infrastructure. So, I mean, I just wanted to give kudos to him because I think, I mean, it's an amazing legacy that he leaves. And he's one of those people that I don't think gets the attention that he truly deserves for the vision that he created. So I definitely was to do that.
I think we had one common trait. We both believed everybody else could be wrong. And it was interesting because that's what drives you to prove yourself being right. And we're living and breathing the results of this work. And I take my hat off to that every day.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, maybe you can talk a little bit about how this works in different industries in general. Because you're talking about cutting across so many different industries, whether it's academia or transportation or carbon.
Well, what we first had to do was go educate people across, both sides, industry and government, and then give them a concept that they could actually grasp in their hand, right? So everybody talks about data, but they really don't get it. And so we said resilience, and we started talking about the theory of resilience. And so where we went to is that we understood that people need to understand what's going on. They need to see, feel, and touch it, like smart city. Well, listen, as you know, anybody want to define a smart city? There's about 500 different definitions of a smart city, which means it ain't that smart. Okay. So it was one of those things. So we said, okay, what is also needed is, we need to build systems that are forever, that can be self-sustaining, that can be resilient. And what ended up happening is we saw that would be a great idea if we actually had the people to install it. Resilience means workforce. Resilience means we can continue this on, but if you don't have all those parts, you ain't got resilience. So it was finding and looking at where can we take advantages and put all our resources and assets together. And what happened was it started to turn into almost like a workforce development play for the next 100 years. And so as cities start to adopt it, and we're seeing this in projects we're doing in Delaware and projects we're doing in California, we've been in Florida, we've been in West Virginia, we've been in Ohio, we've been in all these states talking about all this wanting more, and they just don't know how to start. And so what we did is we have a history of understanding how to deploy systems around the globe. We work together at Visa. And what I noticed is the first thing they need to do is they got to have a processing center so you even get the stuff be able to be, shipped, the data. And so we started looking at the concept of using some of the opportunity zones to create hubs for digitally underserved communities that would actually participate as part of the workforce development to help deploy secure networks so that this data can actually be transferred between parties that would actually want to pay for some of it, and then bring that revenue and income and equity back to that hub, which has been sponsored by the community, and therefore the community participates in its growth. And that concept blew the cities away. I said, no, it's a utility. You guys, your data stays here. You guys are, you're going to have this new organization that ideally not only is workforce, but will train workforce, and it will keep your community growing and help deploy this digital infrastructure in new jobs in a new world that people might be just interested in.
And by the way, deliver value back to the city.
To the community. Exactly. Like this whole new concept of, hey, you want to do this because you'll get paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, oh, for real. And that's where we've taken our best practices. We've taken our knowledge. We know when, there's fraud going on and stuff that we know from our own past, and said, listen, what if we teach you how to fish? And so that's what we did. Instead of handing them the technology, we decided, listen, we're going to teach you on how to make your own and make it bigger, how to scale it, and how to connect to the rest of the world so that you can give that little girl who's sitting in the hills of West Virginia a chance to get on her own webpage and sell her own goods and become the next, billionaire.
Yeah. Equal access.
Exactly.
It's the thing.
It is. Equality comes in so many different forms. And the key to equality means equal. And when you're saying equal, that means equal playing field. I'm not asking you to give it to them. I'm asking you to give them the opportunity for them to get it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Wow. Well, we could talk about this forever and ever. So I know I'm going to have Jen back and we will maybe dive in to more detail as we go. But I just want to thank you for joining me for this conversation, because I think what's nice about this conversation is the more we talk about things like smart cities or resiliency hub, workforce development, all of those things, the more we actually get people to understand why there is such a need for investment in infrastructure. And I think there is, to your point, there is a lack of knowledge about what that means, not only to our infrastructure, but also to our economy, to the risks that we are enduring as we manage it today. And there's a lot of safety components that come into play with all of those things. I mean, the risks are real, right? So,
yes.
So I just go back to your quote earlier where you said your mom said, you don't get anything if you don't ask. Yep. And so I want to also just let people know how to get a hold of you and how, so that they are aware of what your company is doing. So maybe you could just end with that.
Well, in that case, you can find out a lot about the activities they're doing, how we partner with public entities, how we make sure that we give advice to the right folks by visiting us at www.latticeindustries.com.
All right. That's it. And I know you have Instagram and a bunch of other social media, LinkedIn and all of that. So
Facebook, you betcha. We're on everything. Just look us up, Lattice Industries.
there you go. So I look forward to another conversation with you. I know we're going to get into some additional detail with the Data Institute coming up, talking about like carbon exchange. So hopefully folks will look out for that episode as well. But I just want to thank you, Jen, for joining me for this conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks for joining me on the Jali podcast. Please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. See you next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.